My dad left me everything because stayed, and now they're erasing me from the family completely. So I'm Emily. I'm 29 years old and the youngest of 4 kids, 2 brothers and a sister, and I guess you could say I always felt like the afterthought in the family. Not unloved exactly, just not really noticed. My dad was a quiet man. Smart, steady, never loud, but when he did speak, people listened. My mom passed away when I was 16, and after that, it was mostly just us and our dad trying his best. My older siblings, Andrew, Mark, and Vanessa, were already out of the house by then, off doing their own thing, and I stayed because someone had to. I don't think they ever really understood how much I gave up to stay with him. Dad never asked me to stay. He never made me feel guilty. It was just this unspoken thing between us. He'd wake up before me every morning, make coffee, read the paper, and he'd always leave one of those hard candies on the counter for me. I'd come home from work, and dinner would already be on the stove. He wasn't a talker, but he was present. When I started working from home during the pandemic, we got into this quiet rhythm. I'd work, and he'd putter around the house or garden. Evenings were spent watching old detective shows with him half napping in his recliner. He got slower the last year or two. The kind of slow where you start noticing his hands shake a little when he pours his tea. Where the fridge fills up with the same food over and over because he forgets what he already bought. I started taking on more, managing his meds, driving him to appointments, balancing his checkbook. Again, not because he asked. It just felt natural. So when he passed this past spring, peacefully, in his sleep, at home, I was devastated. Not shocked, but devastated. I was the one who found him. I sat with him for a long time, I don't even know how long, before calling anyone. It didn't feel real. Then came the phone calls to my siblings, the funeral arrangements, all of it. Andrew flew in from Seattle, Vanessa from Boston, Mark drove in from New Jersey. They acted like they were the grieving children, and I was just the housekeeper. Andrew actually asked if I still lived in the basement, which was hilarious because I'd moved into the master bedroom 2 years ago when Dad stopped being able to handle the stairs. Anyway, after the funeral, we gathered at the lawyer's office. None of us really expected anything big. I mean, Dad had a decent retirement account, the house, the old Subaru Forester, and maybe some savings. We thought everything would be split 4 ways. That was the assumption. That was always the assumption. The lawyer, this older guy named Mr. Robbins who looked like he stepped out of a black and white photo, sat us down and went over everything. And then he said it. Dad left the entire estate to me. Everything. The house, the car, the savings. All of it. $300,000 in a savings account, the paid-off house we'd lived in since I was 10, and the car. No mention of Andrew, Mark, or Vanessa in the will at all. I didn't believe it at first. I asked if it was a mistake. I kept waiting for him to say, and the rest is split among the others. But no, it was just me. My siblings went silent. Like, not even angry silent, stunned silent. Vanessa actually laughed. One of those dry, disbelief laughs, like someone had just spilled coffee on her wedding dress. Mark leaned forward, like maybe he misheard. Andrew started checking his phone like he was going to find some hidden camera reveal. I just sat there, speechless. Mr. Robbins handed us copies of the will. Dad had updated it a year ago. He named me the sole beneficiary and made a short note. Just one line in the margin, handwritten. She stayed. That line just crushed me. He didn't need to write more. He didn't need to justify it. But that was all he said. She stayed. My siblings started talking over each other after that. Vanessa was first, of course. She always is. This has to be a mistake. Dad wouldn't do that. Andrew said something about legal recourse. Mark, who always plays the calm one, asked if there had been any pressure or undue influence on our father. Like I somehow tricked him into this. Like I was a snake playing the long con while heating up his oatmeal and folding his laundry. I didn't even know how to react. I think I was still too stunned. They left that meeting pissed, confused, and already talking about contesting the will. Andrew actually told me, "You don't want to tear this family apart over money." I wanted to laugh in his face. Tear this family apart? As if we were some Norman Rockwell painting before this. These are the same siblings who barely called. The same people who sent birthday texts at midnight as an afterthought. The same people who hadn't set foot in that house in over a year. But suddenly, I was the villain. The manipulator. The one who must have done something. The weeks that followed were exhausting. Vanessa sent a 6-paragraph email demanding I do the right thing and divide the money. Mark tried the guilt route, saying how much he needed help with his mortgage. Andrew, who by the way drives a Tesla and owns 2 condos, called me crying about how he was just trying to process this betrayal. Betrayal. That word stuck with me. I was the one who stayed. I was the one who watched Dad's hands shake. I was the one who canceled plans, who gave up vacations, who cleaned up when he was too weak to make it to the bathroom. And now I was betraying them? I didn't reply to their emails. Not at first. I needed space. The house was so quiet without Dad. Every creaky floorboard felt heavier. I kept expecting to hear him call my name from the living room, asking for help turning off the TV. I'd sit on the edge of my bed at night, holding that old pair of slippers he used to wear. And all I could think was how little they knew, how little they cared. But they cared now, didn't they? Now that there was something to gain. The anger came slowly, like smoke through a crack in the door. I wasn't even mad at Dad. I understood him. It was the only way he could say thank you. Maybe even say sorry, for the times he leaned on me too much. For how he let them disappear and left me holding the weight. I finally wrote them one email. Short. Just said, I didn't ask for this, but I won't give it back. If Dad's last wish meant anything to you, you'll respect it. Please don't contact me unless it's to share a memory of him. I won't argue with you. And that was that. They didn't respond. Not for weeks. Then one day, a card arrived in the mail. No return address. Just 3 words in handwriting I recognized immediately. She stayed. It was from Mr. Robbins. No note. Nothing else. Just that. The morning after the funeral, I woke up with that thick, dead weight in my chest. The one that always settles in when someone important is gone and everything around you feels muted. The house smelled like leftover casseroles and too many lilies, and there were still paper cups on the counter from the makeshift coffee station we'd set up for the guests. I had barely slept, still running on autopilot, just trying to keep things together. But my phone buzzed around 9 a.m., and it was a group text from Vanessa. Let's meet at noon to talk through next steps. At Dad's. Just us. I knew what it meant before I even responded. I made a pot of coffee I didn't touch, straightened up the living room, and sat there in the silence until they all showed up, one by one, like vultures circling. Vanessa arrived first, sunglasses on indoors, carrying a leather folder like we were about to conduct a board meeting. Mark followed, in his usual cargo jacket like he was always 5 minutes away from hiking a trail he'd never actually set foot on. Andrew came last, sipping some expensive coffee he probably detoured to grab on the way, like the conversation we were about to have could wait. They sat across from me on the same couches we used to pile on during movie nights when we were kids. But now the air was tight, full of something sharp and quiet. Vanessa didn't waste time. So, about the inheritance. Her tone wasn't accusatory. Not yet. Just businesslike. Like she'd come to collect something that belonged to her. I took a breath. I'm not dividing it. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crack bone. Andrew blinked. Mark frowned like he hadn't heard me right. Vanessa let out this dry, almost amused exhale. Excuse me. I sat up straighter. My hands were folded in my lap, tight. Dad left the house, the money, everything, to me. That was his decision. He updated the will last year. It's legal, and it's final. Mark leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Okay, but obviously he expected you to be fair about it, right? I mean, you're not actually planning to keep it all. I didn't say anything for a second. I could feel the heat crawling up my neck, but I forced myself to keep my voice level. He didn't do this by accident. He knew what he was doing. He made a choice. Andrew shook his head, like he couldn't believe we were even having this conversation. Come on, Emily. This isn't about choices. You were here all the time. You probably influenced him. You know how isolated he got. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because the sheer nerve of it hit me like a slap. Influenced him? Are you serious? I was taking care of him while you 3 were off living your lives. I was the one driving him to the cardiologist, cooking his meals, sorting through his insurance paperwork. I didn't brainwash him. I showed up. Vanessa set down her folder like it was getting in the way of her being able to fully point her rage at me. You always make yourself out to be the martyr, Em. Nobody asked you to stay. You made that choice. That doesn't mean you're entitled to everything. No, I said. But he thought I was. That line landed like a gut punch. Even they couldn't argue with that. For a moment, no one spoke. Vanessa looked down at the rug like she might physically bite her tongue off to keep from saying what she was thinking. Mark leaned back, arms crossed. Andrew finally spoke again, this time softer, almost like he was trying to be the reasonable one. Look, we're not trying to fight you, but this is a family legacy. That house is where we all grew up. That money could help all of us. You don't think splitting it makes more sense? I stared at him. I couldn't even find the words for a second. I had pulled weeds out of that backyard until my hands bled. I had scrubbed mildew off the bathroom ceiling while my dad sat coughing in the next room. I had postponed job interviews, canceled trips, watched friends move on with their lives while mine shrank down to doctor appointments and prescription refills. And now, suddenly, it was ours again? No, I said. It's not about sense. It's about what he wanted. And what he wanted was to leave it to me. Vanessa scoffed. Because you were here doesn't mean you deserve more. You're not some saint, Emily. Don't act like you didn't have something to gain. And there it was. The shift. The subtle accusation cracked open into something ugly. I could see it in their eyes, all 3 of them. rewriting the story in real time. I wasn't the daughter who stayed. I was the manipulator, the schemer, the one who must have whispered poison in our father's ear in those last, quiet months. I stood up. I couldn't sit anymore. You weren't here. You didn't see how hard it got. He could barely walk some days. I had to bathe him. He didn't want strangers in the house. He wanted me. And I was here. Not because I thought I'd get something out of it, but because he was my father. Andrew stood too, slow, measured. You can't honestly think this is fair. Life isn't fair, I said. But this was justice. Maybe for the first time. Mark muttered something under his breath, something about greed, and Vanessa picked up her folder again like she was ready to start researching lawyers. I didn't care. I walked them to the door without offering them coffee or another seat or a single comforting word. As they left, I could feel the shape of our family breaking along new fault lines. Not loud, not dramatic, just a long, slow unraveling. And I didn't try to stop it. It wasn't until a few weeks after the confrontation that the full picture started to come into focus. I had spent most of that time buried in logistics, closing accounts, notifying banks, sorting through years of receipts and hospital paperwork. The living room had become a maze of file boxes and folders. Every few days I'd find something that hit like a memory mine. An old birthday card I gave Dad when I was 9, a photo of him and Mom at the lake, a note he wrote reminding himself to buy Emily's favorite cereal. I didn't expect to find anything more than that. I thought I already knew everything worth knowing. Then I found the folder. It was tucked in the bottom drawer of his desk, behind a row of dusty VHS tapes and a half-used roll of stamps. A thick, worn manila folder, rubber-banded closed, with 3 names written on the front in his handwriting. Andrew, Vanessa, Mark. I knew I shouldn't open it. I knew that the second I started reading, I wouldn't be able to unsee any of it. But I opened it anyway. The first thing inside was a printed email thread between Dad and a credit card company. Apparently, he had been on the hook for a $15,000 balance Andrew had racked up using a joint emergency card Dad had given him years ago. There were late fees, missed payments, and eventually a default that damaged Dad's credit. Andrew had promised to fix it. He hadn't. The last message in the chain was from Dad, dated 3 years ago, saying, "I've canceled the card. Do not contact me again about this." Behind that was a letter from a bank with Vanessa's name on it. A copy of a check she had apparently signed in Dad's name when she was short on rent. He hadn't pressed charges, just covered the overdraft and moved on. But there was a note attached in his handwriting. She told me it was a mistake. I wanted to believe her. Then there were the calendars. Pages and pages from his appointment books. Dates marked with things like called Mark, no answer, or sent birthday card to Vanessa, no reply. Whole months with only my name scribbled in the margins. Dentist at 2, Emily driving. Pharmacy refill, ask Emily. Walk with Emily in garden. I sat there for a long time, my knees tucked under me on the living room floor, surrounded by proof. Proof that the story they were selling wasn't the whole story. They had been gone. Not just physically, but emotionally. Checked out, indifferent, and in some cases downright exploitative. I never knew the details. Dad never said a word. He was private like that. Stoic to the point of self-erasure. But he kept it all. Quietly. Like evidence. There was one more thing at the back of the folder. A copy of the updated will, signed and notarized, with a small note clipped to it in Dad's neat, blocky handwriting. I wish things were different. But I have to be honest with what is. That was when it hit me. He hadn't done this to reward me. He had done it to protect what little he had left. He gave me everything because I was the only one who showed up. The only one who didn't ask for more than he could give. The only one who didn't break his trust and pretend it never happened. Later that night, I sat at the kitchen table with a glass of wine and stared at the folder. I didn't feel vindicated. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt tired. All those years, all the quiet resentment I held toward my siblings for disappearing while I stayed. Now it had a shape. A name. A balance. I finally understood why Dad never mentioned them unless I asked. Why his voice got tight when they called, which was rare, and why the calls were always short. He had already grieved them in his own way. The disappointment had happened long before the cancer, long before the cane, long before I became his daily caretaker. He had lost them quietly, and then he poured what was left into me. I didn't tell them what I found. I didn't need to. They had already written their own version of the story, where I was the thief, the manipulator, the selfish youngest sister. No amount of documents would change that. They didn't want the truth. They wanted control. And Dad knew that. That was why he left it all to me. Not as a reward. Not as a prize. But as a final decision. The last, clear boundary he ever set. A week after I found the folder, the calls started again. This time it was Mark. Not Vanessa with her cold fury or Andrew with his performative concern. Mark, the middle one, the peacemaker when it suited him and the passive observer when it didn't. He left a voicemail at first, his tone laced with forced calm. Emily, I think we should talk again. I've been looking into things, and I'm not sure everything about the will is as solid as you think. Maybe it's time for a lawyer to look into this properly. I didn't respond right away. I let the message sit in my inbox, listened to it twice, just to be sure I heard the thread in it right. It was subtle, but it was there. Not outright saying he'd sue, but that shadow of legal pressure, just enough to make me feel like I was standing on unsteady ground. I forwarded the message to Mr. Robbins and asked for a meeting. Mr. Robbins wasn't fazed. When I walked into his office, he was already flipping through a thick binder with Dad's name on the cover. He didn't even look up at first, just gestured for me to sit. When he finally closed the folder, he folded his hands and gave me a look that was part reassurance, part finality. Emily, I've reviewed your father's documents again. Everything is airtight. The will was signed, witnessed, and notarized in full accordance with the law. He was of sound mind. There's even a letter from his doctor from that same week confirming mental competency. I keep records like a pack rat, and your father was just as meticulous. I nodded, but I could still feel that twitch of anxiety under my ribs. Mark's saying he might get a lawyer. Mr. Robbins didn't flinch. He's welcome to. But unless he has evidence of coercion, fraud, or lack of capacity, no court will touch this. I've been practicing estate law for 32 years. I've seen wills challenged by people with a lot more money and power than your brother, and they didn't get far. Your father made a choice, and he did it clearly. You have nothing to worry about. It should have made me feel better. And part of me did feel relief, I guess. But another part of me, the part still wired to expect backlash at every corner, couldn't fully relax. Mark wasn't the type to throw punches, but he was the type to lob them from across the room with a smile on his face. I sent him a short message the next day. Spoke with Dad's attorney. Everything's in order. You're welcome to consult a lawyer, but the will holds. He didn't reply. 2 days later, he called again. This time he didn't leave a voicemail. Just a single text after the missed call. Forget it. Not worth it. That was it. 3 words that carried more bitterness than surrender. I knew him well enough to hear it in the silence that followed. He hadn't expected me to hold my ground. He thought I'd get nervous, maybe agree to a compromise. Split the money 3 or 4 ways to keep the peace. But there was no peace to be kept anymore. That part of the story was over. A few nights after that, Mr. Robbins called me unexpectedly. I thought maybe he had more paperwork, another form to sign, but all he said was, "Your father made it very clear to me, Emily." He was aware of what this decision would do to the family dynamic. But he told me something I think you should hear. He said, "If I leave it equally, I'm rewarding absence. If I leave it to her, I'm rewarding presence. And I'm choosing presence." I didn't say anything. I just sat there in the dark kitchen, phone pressed to my ear, surrounded by the hum of the refrigerator and the weight of everything left unsaid. There was no victory in any of this, just clarity. And finally, peace. There were nights I'd lie in bed staring at the ceiling, the whole house wrapped in that hollow kind of silence you only get after someone dies. The kind where you hear every creak in the walls, every shift in the pipes. It had been a month since the funeral, but the air still smelled faintly of incense and old flowers, like the house hadn't figured out yet that the grieving was over. And even though everything was settled legally, I couldn't shut off the noise in my own head. It hit me hardest at the quietest times, loading the dishwasher, folding the laundry, putting away another envelope of sympathy cards. A slow, gnawing guilt that would creep in when I wasn't expecting it. Not because I thought I'd done something wrong, but because I couldn't ignore how final it all felt. My father was gone. My siblings hated me. And I had all of it. The house, the money, the car keys still hanging by the door. It wasn't about the numbers in the bank or the title on the deed. It was about the fact that I was the only one left with anything to hold. There were moments, God, more than I'd admit, where I caught myself wondering if I should split it. Maybe not equally, but something. Some token gesture to ease the ache in my stomach that flared every time I passed the family photo in the hallway. The one from when we were still pretending. When we were still 4 kids with 2 parents and birthdays with sheet cake and shared gifts under the tree. Maybe if I gave them something, it would make it easier to live with. Maybe it would soften the way Vanessa's silence sat like a stone in my chest, or the way Andrew's name popping up on my phone made my pulse skip for all the wrong reasons. But then I'd remember that folder in the drawer. I'd remember my father's handwriting, shaky but deliberate, spelling out everything he had endured in quiet. And I'd remember what Mr. Robbins told me on the phone, that sentence my father had said out loud to someone else, probably the only time he had ever admitted it outside his own head. If I leave it equally, I'm rewarding absence. And he was right. He wasn't perfect. None of us were. But he was trying, in his own way, to make a final decision that reflected what his life had actually looked like in the end. Not the family scrapbook version. The real one. The one where I was the one washing his sheets when he was too embarrassed to ask for help. The one where I sat in the ER with him at 3 a.m. when he couldn't breathe. The one where he waited for me to get home from the pharmacy just to feel safe enough to sleep. Every time I tried to picture handing over part of the money or putting the house up for sale just to divide it up, I felt like I was erasing that. Like I was rewriting his choice to keep everyone else happy. And that felt worse than the guilt. So I stopped debating it. I stopped pacing the floor at night, rehearsing phone calls I'd never make. I made peace with what he left me, and with what that meant. Not because I thought I deserved it more, but because he believed I did. And after all the years of second-guessing myself in this family, that belief was the one thing I wasn't going to betray. It was around 2 in the morning when I finally typed it all out. The house was quiet except for the ticking wall clock in the hallway, and I couldn't sleep again. I'd been turning everything over in my head for days. The will, the fights, the folder, the guilt, all of it. There was this pressure building in my chest that I couldn't seem to get rid of, and something about the way my siblings had gone so silent, like they were trying to erase me completely, made it worse. So I opened my laptop, went to Reddit, and just started writing. I didn't think anyone would read it, not really. I wasn't looking for validation or advice. I just needed to get it out of my head and somewhere else, anywhere else. I wrote the whole thing in one sitting, from the funeral to the lawyer's office to the phone calls and the folder in the drawer. I didn't soften it or make it sound prettier than it was. I just told the truth. When I hit post, I closed the laptop and went to bed without checking for comments. By morning, it had blown up. Thousands of upvotes. Hundreds of comments. My inbox full of strangers telling me they saw me, that they understood, that I wasn't wrong. People shared their own stories about caretaking, about being the one who stayed when no one else did. Some told me they wished their parents had done the same thing my father did. Others said they had been in my siblings' shoes and still thought I had done the right thing. It felt strange at first, reading all of it. Like I had opened up something deeply private and it had caught fire in public. But the more I read, the more something in me started to settle. For the first time since all of this started, I didn't feel completely alone in the decision I had made. It wasn't about strangers picking sides. It was about someone finally saying out loud what I had been struggling to believe myself. That honoring my father's will wasn't betrayal. That staying wasn't manipulation. That receiving everything he left me didn't make me greedy or heartless or selfish. It made me seen. And after all those years of being in the background, always the one helping, never the one noticed, that mattered more than I expected. The validation didn't undo the fracture in my family. It didn't erase the silence that still sat between me and the people I used to call my siblings. But it gave me a kind of clarity I hadn't had before. It reminded me that sometimes, doing the right thing doesn't feel good at first. It just feels necessary. It didn't happen all at once. There was no big fight or final message saying they were done with me. It was quieter than that. Slower. At first, they just stopped responding to my texts. Then I noticed I wasn't included in the group chat anymore. Vanessa deleted me on Facebook. Mark unfollowed me on Instagram. Andrew didn't even bother pretending. He just went completely silent, like I didn't exist at all. It was surreal how fast it all dissolved. We had grown up in the same house, eaten at the same table, shared the same parents. Now they acted like I was some stranger who had stolen something that was rightfully theirs. I tried to tell myself it didn't matter, that it was expected, even. But when birthdays came and went without a single message, when I saw a picture of all 3 of them together at a cousin's wedding I wasn't invited to, it hit harder than I thought it would. I never thought we were especially close, but I never imagined it would end like this. That I'd be walking through the grocery store and have to turn my cart around because I saw someone who used to be part of our family friend circle and didn't want to deal with their pity smile or questions. That I'd stop checking my phone after holidays just to avoid the sting of knowing no one had reached out. That I'd sit in this house, the house I used to share with my dad, and feel like it was shrinking around me because of how empty it had become. The loneliness was a different kind of quiet than grief. Grief has shape. It has weight. But loneliness is harder to pin down. It just lingers in the corners of rooms and follows you into bed at night. I kept busy, working longer hours, filling up my weekends with errands I didn't need to run, baking more than I could ever eat just to feel like the kitchen still had a reason to be used. I started going on long walks in the evenings, around the neighborhood, where people still waved at me like everything was fine, like nothing had changed. But it had. Everything had. What surprised me, though, was how much support came from places I didn't expect. Old friends I hadn't talked to in months messaged me after reading the post. A coworker I'd only exchanged small talk with over coffee brought me a plant for the windowsill and said, "I read your story. I just wanted to say your dad sounds like a good man." One night, a woman I barely knew from a book club I joined once sent me a message that just said, "You're not wrong, and you're not alone." I read it 3 times before I could even reply. I went back to the post a few times, reading the comments slowly, like they were letters from people who knew me better than my own siblings did. They reminded me that sometimes family isn't blood. Sometimes it's the people who show up when everything else falls apart. Sometimes it's the ones who read your words at 2 in the morning and take the time to say, "I see you." And that helped. It didn't fix the silence. It didn't fill the gap, but it made it bearable. It gave me something solid to hold on to while everything else felt like it was slipping away. I didn't choose the estrangement, but I chose not to chase after people who were more upset about a will than they ever were about being present. And that, at least, felt like something I could live with. The shift wasn't dramatic. It didn't come with a big announcement or a perfect moment of clarity. It started with a quiet morning, sunlight spilling through the kitchen window, the kind of morning my dad used to call a good porch day. I was sipping coffee and sorting through one of the last boxes from the office when I found his old notebook. Not the one he used for appointments or bills, but the one he kept for himself. The one with half-sketched plans for garden beds, quotes scribbled in the margins, random thoughts that didn't have a home. Near the back was a list. It wasn't titled. It just started mid-page with, "If I had more time." The first few items were simple. Learn Spanish. Fix the porch swing. Try baking bread from scratch. Then it shifted. Take a class with Emily. Donate more to the library. Teach someone how to do taxes. Volunteer at the VA. I sat there for a long time just looking at that list. It wasn't long. Maybe 15 items total. But it felt like a window into all the things he didn't say out loud. That night, I opened my laptop and started researching local programs. I'd always wanted to go back to school, but it never felt like the right time. Now there was no excuse. I enrolled in evening classes for nonprofit management, something I'd been circling for years but never dared to commit to. At first, it felt strange walking into that classroom with a mix of 20-year-olds and people twice my age. But something about it grounded me. I was learning again, expanding instead of shrinking. For the first time in months, I wasn't just surviving the aftermath of loss. I was building something. With the savings, I made a quiet donation to the public library where my dad used to take me when I was little. Nothing flashy, just enough to fund a new reading program and update the computer lab. I didn't put my name on anything. I didn't want to. It was for him. I also started volunteering on weekends at a local shelter that helped veterans navigate housing and healthcare paperwork. It was overwhelming at first, all the bureaucracy and frustration, but I stuck with it. Every time I filled out a form or made a call for someone who didn't know where to start, I thought of my dad squinting at his own insurance letters, muttering under his breath, "They make this impossible on purpose." Slowly, I started finding rhythm in a life that didn't revolve around grief or resentment. I fixed the porch swing. I baked bread that came out like bricks the first 3 tries. I planted herbs in the kitchen window and finally replaced the broken step at the back of the house. I didn't do any of it to prove anything. I just did it because I could, because I had time, because he gave it to me. The house didn't feel like a mausoleum anymore. It felt like mine, like ours, in some strange way. His jacket still hung by the door, and I kept his coffee mug in rotation. But the silence didn't weigh the same. It wasn't heavy anymore. It was full of decisions I gotta make. Full of space to grow into the kind of person I didn't realize I could be. I didn't need anyone's approval. I wasn't waiting for a phone call or an apology that would never come. I wasn't trying to fix a family that didn't want to be whole. I was just living. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. It came on a Thursday. I was walking home from my evening class, the kind of cool spring night that made the air smell like rain even though the sky was clear. I had just finished giving a short presentation about a nonprofit model I was researching and was still riding the nervous energy of speaking in front of people again. I wasn't expecting anything more from the night. Just dinner, maybe a quiet hour reading before bed. But when I got home and checked my phone, there it was. A text from Mark. It wasn't long, just a few lines. "Hey, I've been thinking about everything. I know I didn't handle it right. Would you be willing to talk sometime? Just talk." I stared at it for a while without moving. My first reaction was suspicion, then a wave of something I couldn't name. Not hope exactly. Not anger either. Just a sharp awareness that the silence had finally been broken. I didn't respond that night. I needed time to think. I needed space to decide if hearing from him again was something I actually wanted or just something I felt obligated to do. It took 3 days before I answered. I told him I'd meet him for coffee, somewhere public, somewhere neutral. He agreed without pushing. We met the following Sunday at a cafe near the park. I got there first, ordered chamomile tea, and sat by the window. When he walked in, he looked different. Not physically, but in the way people do when they've had to sit with their own choices for longer than they expected. He didn't waste time pretending nothing had happened. He sat down, hands clasped tight, and said, "I was wrong. I let the money, the will, all of it get in my head. And I blamed you because it was easier than blaming myself. I didn't say anything right away. I just nodded slowly, letting him speak. He went on, not rehearsed but careful, explaining how after the dust settled, he started seeing things more clearly. How he reread old emails from Dad, looked at the way he'd pulled back over the years, and started to understand that maybe what happened wasn't betrayal, it was consequence. When he finished, I set my cup down and looked him in the eye. I appreciate you saying that, but things can't go back to how they were. He nodded immediately, like he had already prepared himself to hear it. I get that. I'm not asking you to fix it or pretend we're close again. I just didn't want to leave it like that forever. I told him the truth, that I had made peace with how things ended, that I wasn't holding on to anger anymore, but I wasn't going to pretend the damage hadn't happened. I told him if we were going to try being in each other's lives again, it would have to be slow, on my terms. No group chats, no surprise visits, no expectations beyond honesty. He agreed. No protest, no defensiveness, just a quiet understanding. We talked for another hour after that, mostly about small things. His work, my classes, the way the neighborhood had changed since we were kids. It wasn't warm, but it wasn't cold either. It was cautious. It was real. When we said goodbye, he didn't hug me. He didn't ask when we'd talk again. He just said, "Take care of yourself," and walked to his car. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was carrying the weight of our family alone. Not because things were fixed, but because I had finally drawn the line. And he, for once, respected it. A year after the funeral, the house looked different. Not just on the outside, though I did repaint the porch and finally fix the gutter Dad always meant to get around to, but inside too. The rooms didn't feel frozen anymore. His slippers weren't still by the recliner. The medical supplies were gone. The quiet wasn't heavy. It was calm. I had filed the paperwork months earlier. The foundation launched quietly. No press release, no launch party, just a website and a name that meant something to me. The Walter James Foundation. It wasn't flashy. It didn't need to be. We partnered with local schools, funded transportation grants for low-income high school students attending community college, bought laptops for kids trying to finish GED programs while juggling part-time jobs. Nothing that made headlines. But I saw the difference. I read the emails. I watched the faces change in the photos they sent back. It was real. My father would have hated the attention, but I think he would have loved the purpose behind it. Helping people who just needed a little time. A little breathing room. That was who he was, under all the quiet. A man who helped where he could, when he could, even if no one ever saw it. Even if no one ever said thank you. There were still moments where the old ache crept in. The kind that shows up when you're doing something good and you instinctively reach for your phone to tell the one person who would have understood without explanation. But the sadness didn't hollow me out anymore. It just folded itself into the work, into the letters I signed, into the decisions I made. I didn't feel like I had to prove anything anymore. Not to my siblings, not to the people who whispered or judged or filled in the blanks with their own assumptions. I had found a way to carry his name forward that wasn't about money or ownership or proving who deserved what. It was about choosing to use what he left me to do something better than just holding on. This house was never the prize. The money was never the reward. The real legacy was the space to become who I wanted to be, who I was becoming. Someone who didn't ask for permission to live her life with purpose. Someone who didn't let silence stop her. So that's it. That's the whole story. I've told it as honestly as I can. I'm not perfect. I didn't handle everything gracefully, but I honored my father's will, and I found something better than approval in the end. I found peace. Now I want to hear from you. What would you have done in my place? Do you think I made the right choice? Would you have shared the inheritance or followed the will as it was? Have you been through something like this with your family? I'm curious how you see it, because sometimes the hardest part isn't making the choice. It's living with it afterward.